With the passing of President Bush, the country lost the last Cold War president. What President Reagan and then President Bush did to fight communism around the world really changed the trajectory of the world. Now, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, Russia is again aggressive under Vladimir Putin, most recently in Ukraine, firing on those ships and capturing those sailors. Unless I'm mistaken, you didn't move U.S. assets after that happened. How can the U.S., what can the U.S. do to deter Russia's behavior in this environment?
Well, this is a very complex situation because Mr. Putin is clearly a slow learner. He is not recognizing that what he is doing is actually creating the animosity against his people. He's not acting in the best interest of the Russian people, and he is actually causing NATO to rearm and to strengthen the democracy's stance, the unified stance of all the democracies together. We're joined here today by several members of the NATO alliance, including the Minister of Defense of Lithuania. He and I were in the forests of his country last year alongside troops from a number of NATO nations, and what we are seeing Putin do with his ripping up of international agreements, violating in the Kursk Strait this last week, a joint statement agreement between Ukraine and Russia. We are seeing that we're dealing with someone that we simply cannot trust.
Has the relationship worsened since you've been Defense Secretary?
There is no doubt the relationship has worsened. He tried again to muck around in our elections this last month, and we are seeing a continued effort along those lines. So Russia doesn't speak with one voice. We find that Russia, on the surface, tries to make certain very deceitful statements stick. They don't stick. Their actions speak louder than words, and it has worsened the relationship.
I want to bounce around the world, but following up on this, you said they tried again to muck around in our elections this past time. Why did you feel like the U.S. had to go on the offense to battle Russia and China in cyber? Has the threat increased significantly?
I don't know that the threat has increased. It's his continued efforts to try to subvert democratic processes that must be defended.
And go on the offense to do that?
We'll do whatever is necessary to defend them.
I was trying to get you down that road. I'm going to bounce around the world, if we can, talk about some hot spots, and then talk about, as you mentioned, readiness for the military. Today, Secretary Pompeo released a statement saying Iran has test-launched a ballistic missile with multiple independent warheads. What can you tell us about this launch, and how would you rate the threat from Iran, maybe compared to the threat from North Korea?
Iran is an interesting case of a regime that does not care for the best interests of their people. They're a revolutionary cause at that level. They take actions, constant actions, that actually put their people in worse position. The threat from Iran is multifaceted. And certainly what they have done with this launch is violated the sense of the United Nations Security Council resolution that told them not to do these kind of launches. It shows that our best efforts to try to talk them out of their aggressive support of terrorism is probably going to be as unsuccessful as the UN's effort to stop them from launching missiles. And right now, the strategic level of threat from Iran is less worldwide than Korea's, but it is certainly significant regionally, and it could grow beyond that if it's not dealt with.
And this recent launch is significant?
Yes.
Okay. Clearly, this administration has changed direction when it comes to Iran on foreign policy focus from the last administration. Some of the critics say maybe too far. The Wall Street Journal today reported that the CIA has medium to high confidence that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman personally targeted Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist, and probably ordered his death. Do you agree with that?
Well, First, when it comes to Iran, that is a factor we're going to have to deal with. It's best dealt with diplomatically, where diplomatic means don't work. The more we can unite everyone to confront Iran, we have to do so. When it comes to the Khashoggi murder, we have every expectation that whoever was involved in this, whether directly involved or directing the murder, is going to be held to account. That is our country's expectation. We see that as not in any way reducing the strategic imperative to work together, as many nations as possible, to keep Iran, to keep their mischief, their murderous mischief, under control, to reduce it, to roll it back. You know what they do through their proxies, Lebanese Hezbollah in Lebanon. You've seen what they've done in Syria to keep a murderer in power. And he would not be in power today were it not for the Iranian regime. Again, we do not have issues with the Iranian people. It's the regime. And what we're going to have to do is figure a way to have these two thrusts, accountability for Khashoggi's murder and unified confrontation against Iran's mischief, their terrorism, their murder, their mayhem, and keep those two lines of effort unrelenting. We want to know what happened, by who all was engaged with Khashoggi, but at the same time, we cannot deny the threat that Iran poses to all civilized nations.
You know, some people looked at that image of the Crown Prince giving a high five to Vladimir Putin at the G20 and, you know, had a real problem with it, just looking at the geopolitical implications of all of that. But basically, you're saying that Saudi Arabia's help with the U.S. when it comes to Iran takes precedence right now.
I don't think there is a precedence. Accountability for the murder of Khashoggi stands alone. It is distinct from any other factors going on. However, it is integral to our relationship with Saudi. Right now, we do not have a smoking gun. Except for the last 24 hours, ladies and gentlemen, I have seen all the intelligence we have. We do not have a smoking gun that the Crown Prince was involved. We certainly need to continue to explore everyone or explore all aspects of the murder and find anyone who was involved. But that should not in any way dissuade us from basically confronting Iran.
All right, moving on. What happens if Congress passes legislation to halt U.S. military involvement in Yemen?
Well, I don't like speculating on Congress. I'll wait, and I have another opportunity coming up this time in the House of Representatives.
So you're going to make that case?
I will make the case that we need to act on our own best interests, and that includes standing up for the principles we believe in. That includes freedom of the press, I might add, Bret, as a representative sitting here, and an admired one. And I would just tell you that we do not find standing up for our values in any way inconsistent with also providing for the protection of this country.
Afghanistan. This week, unfortunately, you lost 5 soldiers in Afghanistan, 79 wounded. Do you really believe that the Taliban has an incentive to sit down for peace talks? You've dropped more bombs in Afghanistan than you have just in recent weeks in more than a decade. So are you trying to bomb the Taliban to the peace table?
The Taliban have made very clear that the lives of the Afghan people are of no interest to them. They know they cannot win at the ballot box. At least that's been their supposition, and that's why they use bombs. If you can't win at the ballot box, you have to try to terrorize people into dominating them. So we are going to stand with the 41 nations, the largest wartime coalition in modern history is the NATO-led campaign in Afghanistan. It was down to 39 nations when we came in. 2 nations have joined. By the way, they're both Muslim nations. We're up to 41 nations. We have donor nations, 70 of them. They're committed to this effort. I would just tell you that if we leave 20-odd of the most dangerous terrorist groups in the world centered in that region, and we walk out of there, then we know what will happen. Our intelligence services are very specific that we will be under attack in a number of years, a very few number of years.
Are you facing pressure to wind up the U.S. mission in Afghanistan?
We're facing pressure right now on the Taliban. That's our goal. Our goal is to reconcile. We now have Ambassador Khalilzad. He is a very strong ambassador. He's in charge of the reconciliation effort, and we're going to do our level best to drive this to a political resolution in order to end it. It's gone on now. When you look at 1979, the year I first sailed into Mideast waters, that's the year that the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and turned the country upside down. We're going to have to try to end this war, and 40 years is enough. It's time to end it and get the people of Afghanistan back on the right track. It's going to take regional help. It's going to take the UN's help. But for the first time that I can ever recall, a week ago, the UN representative there said he sees real hope for peace. First time we've ever heard that.
And that's what winning looks like there.
Absolutely. Winning, go back to Secretary Clinton when she was the Secretary of State. She laid out 3 conditions to the Taliban: break with al-Qaeda that attacked the United States and other countries, quit killing Afghan people, and live by the Constitution. If you can win with your party platform, then come on in. Those are the 3 starting points for how we reconcile and bring this war to an end.
You mentioned Latin America. The refugee situation from Venezuela is really now one of the worst in the world. If Venezuela continues to spiral as it is downward, do you foresee the U.S. having to do something there?
Well, first of all, we are doing something there. You know, when you look back at last year, it's a pretty rough year for democracy from some people's calculation, but not in our hemisphere. Democracy is actually spreading. We have 3 countries, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, who are living in the past. They're not going the right direction. The rest of the hemisphere, from Canada to the tip of Chile and Argentina, is going in the right direction. Those countries are very concerned down in that region with what's going on in Venezuela. It is tragic. Again, it's what happens when you have an irresponsible despot leading a country to ruin. And I think what we should do is work by, with, and through our Latin American allies as we stabilize this situation. Right now, you'll see that we have a U.S. naval ship, Comfort, a hospital ship, that's down there providing medical aid to many of these refugees. We are doing our best diplomatically and through humanitarian aid, but ultimately this regime is going to have to go, and it's up to the Venezuelan people, it's up to the regional states in that area to help expedite that and bring that country back to a more prosperous and positive future.
You've been asked to cut the defense budget by 5%, the $716 billion defense budget. First, can you do it? Second, what effect, if you do it, would it have on fixing problems like those that led to many of the accidents involving aging equipment?
Yeah, this is the normal give and take of building the president's budget, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a decision. This is where the president is trying to sort out competing priorities. And I would just, as I mentioned, Chairmans Thornberry and Chairman Inhofe have written where the House and the Senate committees right now, armed services committees are right now. I would just tell you that the issue is in play, and I'll give my advice to the president. I owe him the courtesy of that in private before I speak about it publicly.
Well, you could say it's going to be challenging.
It should be challenging. We don't want to spend any money in excess of what is needed on our defense. But at the same time, this is not an arena where we can calculate so precisely that I think we can take chances either. We've got to make certain we restore America's strength. You know, and I know that has been President Trump's platform from the beginning. It's up to me to make the logical argument about what the president's submission should look like from Office of Management and Budget to the Congress. At that point, the Congress, under their constitutional responsibilities, will take our input on board. But it's, again, remember, ladies and gentlemen, it's the worst form of government except for all the rest we've tried. This is what it looks like in the real world as we push it forward. But I'm optimistic that at the end of the day, we'll have what we need to keep our country safe.
Mr. Secretary, are you concerned that with the force that you have today, that you could lose a war with Russia or China?
Not in the least.
Zilch, nada.
No, my goal is to deter it and give the diplomats time. You all know what my technical job description is, to run the Department of Defense, the military operations, that sort of thing, give the president advice, work with our allies. My real job description, Secretary Panetta, when you were there, I think my real job description is how do you keep the peace? One more year, one more month, one more week, one more day, one more hour, so the diplomats can work their magic, our allies can work with us, and we keep another tragedy of war from breaking out.
There's a lot of question about the magic that is or is not working with North Korea. Days before this forum last year, North Korea launched its third ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. H.R. McMaster, then National Security Advisor, told me right here on this stage that the threat was increasing every day. What is your assessment of North Korea now as we get word of building long-range missiles and working on its nuclear program continues?
Well, first of all, I think if you look at 1 year ago, you summed it up very well. It was going anywhere but good. And following the Singapore discussion between Chairman Kim and President Trump, it has now been shown to be clearly in the diplomats' hands. We have been able to actually reduce some of our exercises as a sincere measure to say we want the diplomat to succeed. None of us thought this would be easy, that it would be automatic, that it would follow a script. So we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and keep at it. We've got a lot of allies with us. As you know, thanks to the administration, we have 3 unanimous United Nations Security Council resolutions imposing sanctions on North Korea. Life is not good there. Yes, they're trying little ways to work around them. But the bottom line is, if they want out from underneath the UN Security Council resolution sanctions, they're going to have to make progress.
But looking at the intel, as you do, are you optimistic?
Yeah, you know, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not paid to be optimistic or pessimistic. I maintain a military that is second to none, with the fervent hope we won't have to employ it, but I have no doubt about the outcome if we must.
Which country is more serious threat to the U.S., China, Russia, or North Korea? I'll throw Iran in, too.
The way I would look at it, Bret, is, you know, I've always admired the way you do questions, by the way. I'll just throw it in. Because he goes to the heart of the issue. He doesn't dance around with his own opinion. You know what I mean? It goes straight to the issue. Here, I would break it down 3 ways: power, urgency, and will. In terms of urgency, North Korea is the problem. We have got to address that issue. It's an urgent issue. That's why the United Nations has Security Council resolutions that are unanimous. How many times, ladies and gentlemen, do you see repeatedly China, France, United Kingdom, Russia, the United States, and more, all voting with one voice? Okay, so think what that says about the urgency of this issue in Korea. Second, I would talk about power, raw power. When you look at Russia and the cavalier use of force, the cavalier discussions about nuclear weapons, clearly Russia needs to be dissuaded, deterred from going down a path that too often Putin appears willing to go down. When you look at will, I've had several meetings with my Chinese counterpart, and there is no doubt in my mind that China wants to return to what it believes is its rightful place in the world as a great nation. And I believe that we're going to have to find ways to work with China two nuclear-armed powers, superpowers, in a manner that when we step on each other's toes, as which may happen from time to time, we have a way to manage those issues. And we are working quietly and, I would say, quite closely together. My Chinese counterpart, myself, Secretary Pompeo, and State Councilor Yang, we are working on trying to craft that way ahead. We're looking for cooperation where we can with China. We will confront them where we must. But it is not our desire to end up in that situation. It's to find a way to manage a new relationship. I believe 10 years from now, 15 years from now, what the Trump administration will be most remembered for, were we able to create that new way to operate with China? Were we able to create a mechanism by which we could maneuver on the world stage economically, diplomatically, security-wise, and keep the peace and not stumble into a miscalculation?
Mr. Secretary, I only have a couple more minutes left, so this is a bit of a lightning round here. Will you sign the extension orders for the nearly 6,000 active duty troops at the U.S. southern border that the DHS has asked for?
Right. We've just received, since I left yesterday to talk to our Air Force Academy cadets, and on my way out here, we've just received Secretary Nielsen's request. She's the Secretary of Homeland Security, of course. I will review it when I get back. Some things have been done, completed. This is the engineer work to put in certain crowd control capabilities. We have no troops in a law enforcement capacity. As you know, it's prohibited under the U.S. Constitution. Remember here that, and I will review it, Bret, and I'll make certain that what we're doing is appropriate for our troops. And if it is, and Border Patrol needs the help, of course we'll provide it. But look back to when President Clinton deployed troops along the border in order to maintain control over immigration. Look back to when President Bush put troops there. The longest duration deployment of federal troops on the border were under President Obama, 7 years they were deployed there. So we'll look at it. If there's a specific issue that requires Department of Defense support for the Commissioner of Border Patrol, then of course we'll provide that. But we'll stay strictly within the Constitution, strictly within our laws, and the law enforcement functions will be carried out by the appropriate people, either the Border Patrol or U.S. Marshals or other federal police, but not by the U.S. military.
All right, last thing. The president was asked in an interview whether he was going to fire you or you were going to leave. First, he called you a Democrat, or sort of a Democrat. Then he said, everybody leaves, people leave Washington, but you have a good relationship. So do you have any plans to leave the administration soon?
Well, if I did, Bret, you wouldn't be the one to know, okay? But ladies and gentlemen, let me explain something. When the President of the United States, Republican or Democrat, male, female, none of that matters. When the President of the United States, and I'd never met Mr. Trump until I met him as President-elect when he called me back for a job interview. When the President of the United States asks you to do something in America, you just do it. To quote Nike, just do it. Don't get all caught up into Hamlet, wishing and wondering and wringing your hands or something like that and saying to do or not to do or whatever. Just do it. Get up, go up, do your job to the best of your ability, uphold the Constitution, give the president your best military advice in my case. But, you know, we've got to get back to the point where service in this country is something you do. I mean, tell you the truth, the only reason I'm back in this low-paying outfit is because I love the troops, because I learned to hate minefields at age 21, but I love guys so valiant they would go through looking for something they didn't want to find because they didn't want their buddy behind them to step on it. And the other reason is I got a love affair with the U.S. Constitution. I'll just leave it at that.
All right, let's leave it at that, because obviously, there's no national draft. This is the last thing. You mentioned it here. There's fewer than 0.5% of Americans currently serve in the U.S. military. Fewer than 9% have ever served. So many Americans don't have a close connection at all to someone who is serving or has served. So the civilian-military divide is expanding. How do you get people who don't have a connection to buy in? Is that a concern for you?
It is a concern. I think many of us, when the draft had developed such a poor reputation for whatever reason, Vietnam, for unfairness, and we got rid of it, many of us in those days wondered, would this turn out to be very good for the military and the all-volunteer? I should describe it as the all-recruited, because there's vigorous recruiting that goes on. Military has been very good. You know, we have all volunteers there. But would it end up being good for the republic? Would it divorce us from the body politic? Would people make decisions quite smug in the fact that none of their family members would be in harm's way? We've got to consider it, ladies and gentlemen. We can't hide from that elephant in the room. I think if, on a broader level, we can get back to a fundamental friendliness with one another as Americans, if we can rediscover a respect for each other as fellow Americans, even if we have very different ideas about how we take the country forward, we probably don't have big differences about where we want to go, ultimately. So if we can create a society in which respect and friendliness is the passport that we all have when we meet each other, whether it be in our school districts or in our businesses or public life or private life, if we can get back to that, then the military is part of that society, representing the most selfless, who literally will go in harm's way for us, will not seem alien anymore. They'll seem like your own brothers and sisters. At that point, whether they belong to your family, your immediate family, or your larger American family, I think we can keep this thing together that we call America. And it's just one great big experiment. But it's noble work, even if it's hard work, and we better all go back to finding a way to embrace one another. And in the military, we're not that special. We're simply patriots who decide this is the way we pay our dues. And a country's like a bank. If you want to take something out of it, if you want to get something out of it, you want economic opportunity, your kids to go to college, you got to put something into it. And there's 100 different ways to serve, but the military, the most selfless, has got to remain embraced by the American people, whether you have a member in the military or you do not. But thank you very much, ladies.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service to the country, and thank you for this. And I'd love to have you on Special Report sometime.